Good evening, friends, and shalom, and blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Welcome to this debate, not episode of Unapologetics, that we have decided to host here on the Synagogue. I am channel host CJ Cox, but I will actually not be today's host. Rather, that will be my good friend here, Nicholas, Proclaimer of Messiah, and me and the gentleman you can see below you, which we should probably actually get that reversed, rage up, and Nicholas
yeah, you can just drag them. All you have to do is click and drag.
Oh, cool. Awesome. I did not know that. Thank you. Anyways, we're going to be having a debate today on whether or not the law of Moses is ethical. So this is definitely going to be, I think, a fun conversation. Obviously, Rage has been both on my show as well as me on his show, as well as us debating. So this is not our first rodeo by any stretch. And this is definitely going to be, hopefully, a really good conversation. Definitely looking forward to it. Want to just briefly say some small channel housekeeping before I pass it to Brother Nick, and that is, do remember to like and share this video if you appreciate the content or if you think this is a good topic to talk about. Please consider subscribing if you're here and have not done so, and hit that bell every time that we go live. And I'm going to go ahead and just save that the other kind of channel housekeeping stuff for potentially the end or maybe a later episode, because we got a fun conversation to get to. So with that, Brother Nicholas, the floor is yours.
Nice. So, shalom, brethren, and welcome all. The topic that our interlocutors are going to be debating this evening is the law of Moses ethical? And I am going to pretend that I don't have a preference. And then we're going to do Siege is taking the affirmative, CJ, the synagogue, is taking the affirmative that yes, the law of Moses is ethical. And Rage, I think I did that right, will be taking the negative that the law of Moses is not ethical. So CJ will be going first. And we're going to do a hard time limit of 12 minutes for the opener. So we're doing what we're calling a 2-minute range at the end. So I'll just tell you guys the hard time limits. 12-minute opener, 8-minute rebuttals. Then we're going to do 10-minute cross-exam back and forth twice. So it'll be 40 minutes. And then they each get a 5-minute closer. And we'll go into Q&A. And then for Q&A, here, let me put a comment. Each get a 5-minute closer. Oh, that's how I sound, like a cartoon boy, huh? So I'm going to put a comment about the questions in the side chat. CJ, I'd like you to pin it to the top. So begin questions with question in all caps. Okay, so I want you to begin your question with question in all caps. Then name, Rage, CJ, or both. Okay, so this is how I want you to ask your questions. The word question in all caps, who the question is for, and then the question. And that way, because I'll be looking in StreamYard, and it doesn't turn orange for my name anyway. And if someone's on their phone, it's like impossible to type my name. It's so long. So that'll work a lot better. Question in all caps for your questions at the end. For the Q&A, I'll be collecting them. And with that, we're ready for CJ to begin. So as soon as you start talking, I'll press play on the timer. Yes.
All right, absolutely. I appreciate that. And so I'll just jump right in here. I want to say, of course, again, shalom all, and thank you for being here, and blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I want to, of course, give my thanks all around, obviously, to God for allowing this to happen, Rage for agreeing to the debate topic, Brother Nick for hosting and moderating for us, and the audience for being here and participating. Hope this is edifying to you guys. Hope that we are actually able to communicate articulately and in a way that actually educates you. And of course, from my perspective, at least, I hope that all glory goes to God by the end of it. So let's just jump right in. So the thesis today is whether or not the law of Moses is ethical. Of course, I'm taking the affirmative on this position today. And for those of you who don't know what exactly that would mean, the law of Moses would be specifically the mitzvot or laws, commands, which are found in the Torah, otherwise known as the Pentateuch, otherwise known as the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, although you're not really going to have commands in Genesis. This law is typically considered to be the foundation for most Abrahamic religions' moral systems and ethical systems, at least. It's certainly one of the most influential ethical laws in world history. But of course, none of that actually has anything to do with the question of whether or not it's ethical. And that's the question that we're going to be hopefully answering for you today. Now, there's a kind of get out of jail free card in the theist position here, in that I could say, well, it's presented from God, therefore it is obviously ethical. While I do actually believe that presuppositional reasoning, I'm not going to argue that way tonight, because obviously I don't think that we would get anywhere with that kind of reasoning tonight. And so while it is certainly reasonable, I think, for the Christian to ask, why does anybody question God? What right do you have to question God? For the purposes of our conversation, I am going to not try to pursue that line of argumentation. Okay. So, what's a good place to start with the law of Moses? Well, the most famous laws in the law of Moses are obviously the 10 Commandments, right? And just off the top of my head, I'm not obviously reading these off of anything right now, but some of them include, but are not limited to: do not commit adultery, do not dishonor your parents, love the Lord your God, don't have any gods before him, actually is exactly how it's worded, and laws against idolatry, covetousness, and a few others. If you look elsewhere into the law of Moses, you'll find a lot of lesser known laws, as well as some more well-known laws. Some of the more well-known include, but aren't limited to, things like kosher laws and Sabbath laws, although Sabbath law in particular, the day, you'll find in the 10 Commandments, but there's other Sabbath laws like once every 7 years, your Jubilee law, such and such. And then the obscure laws like things like washing your hands before you eat, what kind of clothing you wear as a priest, and so on and so forth. Now, the law is given, like I said, there's 613, I don't know if I actually said that, but I did use the word mitzvot. There's 613 mitzvot that are given in the law. And according to the traditional understanding, they would be given to Moses, which would mean sometime around 1406 BC, 1446 BC, give or take about 22 years of error if you're taking a straight and literal interpretation of biblical chronology. A lot of modern scholars would place the Torah's writing well after the death of Moses. I obviously do not affirm that, but regardless, I don't think it'll make much of a difference for my argument today. One of the things that you immediately notice when you read through the law of Moses is that it is incredibly different, not only from any law in the 1400s or any law when other people say that it's going to, any law existing when people say it was written in the future, namely around the 400s. But it's actually incredibly different to any law we have outside of the post-Enlightenment era, and appears to be millennium, literally, ahead of its years. And to make this point as strong as I possibly can, I want to actually go to some of the passages that people think are actually against the Bible being ethical, against the Old Testament law being ethical, and prove how these actually do show just how advanced just how advanced compared to the rest of the world, the law of Moses truly is. So the first thing we're going to go to, we're going for the big guns, Deuteronomy 21:10 through 14. If you're a fan of evilbible.com or any different I hate the Bible, it's super evil kind of websites / atheist apologetics ministries, quote, not quote, haha is what I meant to say. Obviously just a joke there. This is a passage you'd be familiar with as actually a passage that is used against people who believe that the law of Moses is ethical. It appears to show, and indeed it does show, laws for marrying a captive woman in times of war. And so people have looked at this and reasoned this is obviously some example of war rape and etc. And the law of Moses is clearly not ethical. Let's read what exactly it says, and then we'll get into what I have to say about it. When you go to war against your enemies and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands and you take captives, if you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Bring her into your home and have her shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothes she is wearing when captured. After she has lived in your house and mourned her father and mother a full month, then you may go to her and her husband, and she shall be your wife. If you are not pleased with her, Let her go whenever she wishes. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since you have dishonored her. Now, it is important to note that the word dishonored here is speaking about the divorce, not actually the fact that you have been married to her. The fact that you didn't take pleasure in her, as your King James Bible will say. That may or may not be important. I don't know exactly how Rage would want to understand this, but nonetheless, I just wanted to point that out. So, it obviously says what it says. Why would I be arguing that this is actually an example of the law of Moses being ethical rather than unethical? Okay. So, put yourself in the situation of any town on earth, basically, really up until the modern time, and depending on what area of the world you're in, but at least up until the early 1500s, right? And an army shows up, and they come to your doorstep, and they manage to defeat the opposing army. Now they're coming literally to your doorstep. And they've decided that they're going to have themselves a heyday because, well, let's just say soldiers get frustrated on the battlefield, and they like to attack people, torture people, mutilate people, rape people, and all these other sorts of absolutely detestable, disgusting things. Things which you may be surprised to know were not illegal for the vast majority of human history. The very first case of war rape ever tried outside of the theocracy of Israel was in 1470, and it would not be made illegal under international law until 1998. Ladies and gentlemen, the Law of Moses was written sometime around the 1400s BC. Even if you're a secularist, you would say that it was written sometime between 400 and 600 BC. Actually, you'd have to reverse that because 600s go down. In other words, this law can clearly be demonstrated 1,800 years before anybody had ever decided war rape was not a thing, to be ahead of its time. Why do I say that? Because here you have a situation where now the army shows up, and according to their war doctrine, they're actually not allowed to do what it is that they do. Come into your house, pass you around with all of their friends, and get their, quote, frustrations out because they're detestable and horrid people. No, rather, if they actually want to have any attraction to you whatsoever, they have to care for you as one cares for their spouse. They have to provide for you. They have to provide for your children. You are given status as an Israelite. One might wonder why it is that you have to shave your head, trim your nails, and take off the clothes that you got when you were captured. Well, because when your hair grows back, when your nails grow back, and under this new Israelite clothing, you are now an Israelite. And by the way, look at here at the end, if you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she wishes. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave. If you, hey, you know what? As it turns out, I didn't actually like this woman. The Bible says, well, she's an Israelite. She's a autonomous human being, and she is not able to be sold into slavery. Your divorce on her has caused it to where you're not actually able to get any money or monetary value or anything like this, right? In other words, all the things other armies would do for at least the next 1,800 years and potentially the next 2,800 years. And if you want to go tell international law, the next 3,300 years, the law of Moses effectively nullifies in one of the go-to passages to say such and such is not ethical. You can continue with this again when it comes to slavery. People very often will quote Leviticus 25, Exodus 21, so on and so forth, talking about slavery in the Bible. Slavery in the Bible is obviously there. It exists. I'm not somebody who denies that it exists. In fact, I talked to the Raging Atheist before in a debate about whether or not that in and of itself was ethical, and y'all should definitely check that out. If you look at the passages that pertain to slavery in the Bible, you find some very interesting things. So let me go ahead and pull it up here. Leviticus, excuse me, there we go, 25. We're going to find some pretty interesting stuff here comparatively to other laws, right? We're going down after the year of Jubilee because the year of Jubilee is specifically about Jubilee, not specifically about slavery. And I think, what is it? Down to, yeah, here we go. So if any of your fellow Israelites become poor and sell themselves to you, do not make them work as slaves. They're to be treated as hired workers. Thank you. So notice if they sell themselves unto you, meaning they are property, they are to be treated as hired workers or temporary residents among you. They are to work for you until the year of Jubilee. Then they and their children are to be released, and that would be or every 7 years. Just so you know, the reason we know that is because elsewhere in passages it says you can't have an Israelite slave for longer than 7 years unless they decide they want to stay with you after the 7-year period. But nonetheless, moving on. Then they and their children are to be released, and they will go back to their own clans and to their property and to the property of their ancestors. Because the Israelites are my servants, whom I brought out of Egypt. They must not be sold as slaves. Do not rule over them ruthlessly, but fear your God. But wait a minute, you might say. That's specific to the Israelites. And indeed, the next verses do say your male and female servants must come from the nations around you, and from them you may buy slaves. So doesn't this effectively kind of nullify everything you're talking about? Well, not really, because if you go back to the year of Jubilee I was just talking about, you'll see something very interesting. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7th Sabbath year amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the day of atonement, Yom Kippur. Sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all of its inhabitants. So while the Israelite is going to be released, once every 7 years, you still have the release of all inhabitants back to their land at least every 50 years. And by the way, that's not every 50 years from when somebody was bought. That's once every 50 years on the Jewish calendar. So if somebody was sold into slavery 2 years from now, or 2 years from the Jubilee, then they would be free in 2 years, not in 49. When do we see laws like this anywhere else in the world? We don't. When do we see laws abolishing the slave trade like exists in Deuteronomy? 1807. If Deuteronomy is written in the 1400s, that's 3,200 years in the future. And we have tons and tons of examples like that. The point is, if even the worst laws, quote unquote, are actually examples of the law of Moses being millennia ahead of its time, how could we possibly say such a thing was unethical?
Okay, very good. And then, okay, I think we're ready for Rage. As soon as you're ready, then I'll press play on my timer.
All right, unmute. All right, awesome. Thank you. My opening will probably be considerably shorter. So the question tonight is, the Mosaic Law ethical? Is one that hasn't really been debated too often. In prepping for this, I couldn't find a single debate between theist and atheist on the topic. I did see some between Christians on whether or not Mosaic Law applies to Christianity, but I wasn't really able to find any debates on this topic. So not something that gets talked about a lot. So I hope to do justice to my side of this, especially considering I am no student of moral law or the philosophy within it. I am learning, but I will not be arguing in this manner in this debate. Instead, I will focus on a simple definition of the word ethical, how it applies in reality today, and asking if these laws fit that definition. That definition being that the term ethical comes from the Greek ethos, moral character, and describes a person or behavior, or in this instance, a law, as right in the moral sense, being truthful, fair, and honest. When I say how it applies to reality today, that is relevant. I will be looking through my modern lenses here, through my own personal morality and code in a modern era far removed from the ones these laws were written. Morality and ethic evolve with time, in my opinion, as societies evolve. So I will be judging these ancient laws using my own modern ethics, and I want to be upfront about that. There can be no doubt that the Hebrews of the time saw that their law was moral and ethical. But I, an atheist existing in the present, does not. That's why I'm here tonight. If the debate of the topic was Mosaic Law ethical when it was written, hands down, that debate goes to CJ. I wouldn't waste my time. But the question is it ethical? You're not asking an ancient Israelite, you're asking a modern American atheist. And in fact, I think most Christians in the modern world recognize how morally problematic the old law can be. They go out of their way to distance themselves from it, if not claim outright it has no bearing on their faith at all. Christians generally call Mosaic Law the Old Covenant, in contrast to the New Covenant they themselves insist they fall under. This implies that something was wrong with these old laws for God himself to intercede, send Jesus, and change the covenant. While this debate seems to be unique in this atmosphere, the debate of the old law has been raging since Christians first came onto the scene. This can be seen in early Christian troubles in regards to circumcision and the Gentiles. Most Jews and Christians will tell you that the Torah does not apply to Gentiles outside the 7 laws of Noah that apply to everyone. It seems this side of the debate won over time, as very few Christians believe the old law applies to them. I do believe my interlocutor, CJ, might be one of those. So while I have no idea how CJ plans to argue, my goal will be to look at some of these laws and ask quite simply if that is ethical. While I understand CJ's answer will inevitably be yes to all of them, I am hoping those viewing will be able to answer quite easily with the negative. A quick example of this is one of the laws is to love God. Let's apply this to the world we live in today. Would we find it ethical for, say, Joe Biden to write a law demanding we love him? There are many laws in the 613 I have on my list here that I find to be abhorrent, let alone ethical. And I'm fairly certain that if Joe Biden made a law demanding that CJ love him, that probably wouldn't happen. I don't think CJ would follow such a law. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I always enjoy the debates and conversations I have with CJ. I want to thank Nicholas for being our moderator here tonight and the audience for watching. Told you it'll be shorter. I'll concede the rest of my time.
Okay. So that was a good intro, short also. And we have heard each one lay out how they're going to argue this and introduce their argument. Now they'll each have 8 minutes to rebut the other, beginning with CJ.
Thank you. So, couple things that I do want to say here, and I think that this is definitely a very important conversation to get to. So I'm glad that Rage has decided that he will have it with me today, and I hope more people will actually debate these issues, because I agree that these are not only are these not discussed, but even amongst Christians, they're still not very much discussed. Like, for example, I just had a discussion with Randall Rouser about the slaughter of the Canaanites, and it's neither here nor there for this debate, but the point is, if you look it up, you're not going to find another debate like it. That's problematic, I think, considering I don't even have 1,000 subscribers or a Wikipedia page. The point being, we need to talk about these things more. So I appreciate Rage in that. Now, there's not too much, of course, to rebut, because, as he said, the opening statement was a little bit shorter. But there is definitely a couple things to point out. So one thing is, he asked if it would be ethical for Biden to demand we love Biden, or even worse, ethical for Biden to, or not even worse, or even better, rather, for his argument, I would think, would it be ethical for Biden to make a law demanding that we love God? I think that would be a very interesting thing, considering the fact that at that point, Biden would not only be demanding something similar to what we see in the First Commandment, but actually exactly what we see in the First Commandment, and assumedly something that a fundamentalist would agree with, namely that you should love God. The problem with that, of course, is, number one, you do have to distinguish between things which are legal and things which are considered to be, moral in nature, right? So, for example, while I think that it should be, while I think it's a matter of morality, right, that people shouldn't be getting divorced, right? I don't think you should literally be legally withheld from getting divorced. There's obviously legalities that go into that, and we could have a huge conversation on that. But obviously, there's not going to be any blanket laws that ban divorce in the name of God, because we don't live in a theocracy, right? So there is a difference between what one thinks is moral and what one thinks should be legal. Now, you may come back with this and say, okay, but the law of Moses is the national law of Israel, right? So that sort of is a non-objection. And there's a truth to that and a non-truth to that in a couple ways, and so I'll explain what I mean. It is true that this would end up being the law for Israel from the time that we see Moses go into the promised land up until the time that the country is destroyed in 586, right? And of course, that's going to be something that we'll have to deal with in its own, and I will put that aside for a moment because we have to. But if you go beyond that into the modern age, or even the last 2,500 years for the Jews, right, it is something that is seen primarily as a ethical or moral, or even some would go as far as to say philosophical, like those who are Jesusists or things like that, right, who actually just take it in a purely philosophical manner but don't actually believe in any of the divine things, right, kind of law. So it is important for us to make that kind of distinction. Biden's thing would be incorrect, because Biden would be legally mandating people go against their conscience, and I don't think that that is something that we have liberty to do, especially in the modern age. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Number one, from a Christian perspective, Jesus is not presented that example to us. And number two, we live in the United States of America, and we as Christians are respecters of the law of the land, and the Constitution clearly does not allow that, right? So the example I don't think would necessarily work there, right? However, now let's get back to the over here, right? Because Moses did actually mandate this as law for the people of Israel. So how could that sort of a thing be ethical? And there's a couple different things that you would definitely want to note here. The first thing is, as I already pointed out, this law is something that we're going to see being eons upon eons upon eons upon eons ahead of time. And in this particular regard, you actually see that yet again. In that you see a clear and distinct reverence being given, right? Not for hierarchies of man, but for law greater than man, right? Law which the kings of Israel and the prophets of Israel, as we'll see later on, will themselves be held to. Why? Because these are unto God, as the first commandment says, you shall have no other gods before him, right? Not unto some man, some king, even some constitution or vague document or something along those lines, right? We wouldn't start actually having laws that were equal, right? For, again, thousands upon thousands of years into the future. Although you're going to obviously probably be able to find some tribes here and there that maybe had ideas of equalities between persons, right? And that equality between persons is one of the primary reasons for it. There's another reason, namely being made in the image of God. But one of the primary reasons for it is that first commandment. The reverence that you give to God alone, a figure who is outside of humanity, right, ensures that the law comes from not the king, not the government, not the religious institution, not a book, not a constitution, but from God alone. And everybody can be held accountable now to that law, as you see throughout the land of Israel. The other thing I'll just briefly mention is he said you'd be asking, is the law of Moses ethical for us today? Not was it ethical at the time it was written. But there is a reason why we not only have to understand that it was well beyond its years at the time it was written, but also just how far beyond its years it actually was, right? Because basically, if you take the totality of human history, right, what you find is we are the anomaly and not the other way around. People being this luxurious, this lovely, this awesome, it's great, don't get me wrong, but it's the anomaly. It's not normal, okay? Normally, humans are actually quite detestable. We slaughter people in mass. We're thieving all the time. And the law of Moses was able to bring a tribe of people out of that. Thank you. I'll actually be finishing up with this. Was actually able to bring a people out of that thousands upon thousands of years before anyone else would be. In fact, the next time anyone else is actually brought out of these kind of detestable thinking patterns is through the religion that Moses sets forth in this law, namely Jesus Christ, the Messiah, who then delivers this kind of ethical living to the rest of the Gentile world. Outside of that, we have the same detestable practices throughout history, all the way up until our modern century, and even by our modern and sometimes even allegedly Christian institutions. The point being that to say, well, because I in 2021 find this unethical, therefore it's unethical, to say that would be to disregard the vast majority of human history, the vast majority of deeds which humans have committed, the vast majority of ethical systems which have been created, and basically say, I don't have a preference for this, therefore I don't like it, rather than to objectively look at it and say, did this actually benefit humanity in a great way, which I think is the one thing me and Rage could agree on as far as what would define ethics here, or did it not? Did it pull people out of moral abomination, or did it not? And I think that you would be forced to agree that the law of Moses certainly did so, and I'll yield my time.
Okay, excellent. And then starting timers over. Timers are ready to be started over. So Nakasuchi, as soon as you are ready, I will press the time.
All right. Yes. I've been writing a lot of notes, and I want to thank you, CJ, for the awesome conversation so far. You mentioned the 10 Commandments. There's been a lot of debate. A lot of folks on my side will actually debate the morality of the 10 Commandments, and they do a really good job. I'm sure that might be a debate that you would want to have in the future. You did mention that there was 613 laws in the Messiah Code, and many of those I don't take issue with, and I don't take issue with them here in the modern age. Many of them I do. So, at some point I'll probably start going through some of those. And even here at the end of this rebuttal, I plan on getting to two very specifically in response to something that you just said. So you mentioned how these laws were advanced to the rest of the world. Now, I agree and I disagree. I think that the laws were designed to differentiate the Israelites from the rest of the nations around them at the time. There was definitely specific laws that told them how to grow and groom their beards to look differently than most men were keeping their beards back then, things like that. I definitely think that there was some similarities to other laws from nations around them at the time. You talked about laws for marrying captive women in time of war. I know you kind of got Jill started in the side chat there briefly. And I've been an atheist that really will hammer down on that. It's not something that I was really planning on focusing. I did figure that you would bring it up and I just respond. So I'm going to do that now. To me, laws for marrying captive women in times of war, while they can be argued to be moral, as Jill has, and while you have, I think I have to ask if it's ethical to pretty much demand, there's not really much choice here, is there, that a woman marry the person that just slaughtered her family, or a warrior of the army that just slaughtered her family. I don't think that we would consider that ethical. I don't think that we would consider that to be a moral thing, and or allow that in our societies today, because as I said, societies tend to evolve. Our moral code tends to evolve with those societies. You made good points about how rape and war wasn't illegal for a certain time. We do have a barbaric past. I totally agree with you on that. Again, though, I'm not a man that lived in that time. I can only go based upon my moral standard. In my opinion, having a debate topic as precise as you can is usually good for the affirmative, because the debate topic isn't about whether it was moral back then. You're asking me the question, and pretty much you're in the affirmative. So I just got to poke holes and establish some doubt. The burden of proof is on you. The slavery thing, we've hammered home on that. I don't really want to go too much into that, although we can a little bit. I mean, whether you want to look at it as slavery, whether you wanted to look at it as indentured servitude, most societies in Western civilization has even deemed indentured servitude as unethical, as immoral, and has outlawed such. So I don't even really understand the argumentation. I understand that it's a lesser form of slavery, maybe not as brutal, maybe not as harsh. I understand that, by the letter of the book, you can take it that, Israelite masters were kind to their slaves. You mentioned that every 50 years, all slaves could be free. I ask you, is a single day of enslavement ethical? Because it's not. It just purely isn't. You said, treated as hired workers every 50 years. Deuteronomy abolishes slavery. I think that was maybe a mistake of the tongue on your part. I don't think Deuteronomy abolishes slavery. I think it sets the rules for it. Now, in your rebuttal, Biden, and that was all just your intro. In your rebuttal, Biden, you kind of addressed my point. You said Biden would be legally binding people to love him. And you went on to say, God isn't doing that because the law comes from God, not the kings, blah, blah, blah. And that's another debate. Sure, we can debate whether or not God created those laws or not. But I, as an atheist, I don't believe God created those laws. I believe that man created those laws. So maybe that's why you kind of wasn't quite understanding where I was taking that. You said the law of Moses brought people out of mass slaughter. This is the final point I really kind of want to hammer home. So hopefully I'm filling enough time. I didn't, I kind of went through that quickly. But the law of Moses calls for the extinction of an entire people. I don't see how you can make the statement that the law of Moses brought the Israelites out of that kind of behavior. And let me pull it up because I've got all 613, well, not all of them. I got the ones that I found pretty abhorrent. But Law 596, Deuteronomy 27, 2017, destroy the 7 Canaanite nations. Law 597, Deuteronomy 2016, not to let any of them remain alive. I mean, if that isn't mass slaughter, I don't know what is. I consider mass slaughter to be unethical. I consider it to be morally reprehensible. I don't think that there's a debate there. Now, I know that we've debated this several times, so there is a debate there. But to me, there just really isn't. So with that, I'll concede the rest of my time.
2 minutes.
That's all I got, Nicholas.
Okay, the alarm must have gone off at the same time you said you were done, and I couldn't hear you.
I went through it too quick. I need to take a breath and slow it down, huh?
Well, I'm also incredibly long-winded, so I could probably like say everything that I've said in like half the time.
I should just cede the rest of my time to you, CJ, because I know you do take your time and speak.
And the next time we'll weight it in CJ's favor.
I think my position is just that easy, but
So guys, I do want to propose an idea. I know this would have been better to do beforehand, but we have a 10-minute cross exam each way, and then 20 minutes is pretty short for discussion, but people might like to see you guys do a discussion for 20 minutes instead of double cross exam. So of course, either of you is allowed to say, no, we're holding to what we already agreed to, but if you both think that's better for the audience, we could change.
I'm good with anything, so whatever CJ wants to do.
Yeah, I'm cool with that too. That's fine. I think that'll give a little mix of both, so that's cool.
Yeah, because you guys will probably engage pretty well during cross exam, but I'm like, I'd like to hear you guys have a two-way discussion also. So we'll try out the super fancy. Okay, so the cross-examinations are going to start next. We have had our introductions from each interlocutor, our rebuttal from each interlocutor, and we're going to have a 10-minute cross-exam from CJ examining Rage, and then Rage Nakasuchi will cross-examine CJ after that. So I'll still give a 2-minute warning and a 30-second warning, and as soon as you start asking CJ, the clock will begin.
Absolutely. So I'll ask about the slavery question first, just because I want to get that one out of the way, since we do have a whole debate on it. And I just want to ask very simply, would you recognize that the system of slavery that is set up in the Bible is a system of slavery that is certainly set apart from not only any around it, but any for the next thousands of years, including but not limited to our own here in the United States?
Yeah, I'll give you that. No, I have had a couple scholars tell me that I give too much ground there, but from my research, I could agree that I do find it to be a more progressive system of slavery. And I also recognize that Israel would be one of the first nations to abolish slavery altogether.
Awesome. So I appreciate that, because that does lead me kind of into a question I'm going to save for a moment, since we got that one pretty quickly. And since I'm going to save it for the moment, I'm just going to see if I can build a couple of other things into it and see if that'll make the question make more sense. So the other thing I would ask is, would you agree that Deuteronomy 21 presents a high level of a level of, I want to word it in a way that you'll find agreeable, but still be able to make a point in case you want to object. Would you agree that Deuteronomy 21 presents a view of captive women that is higher than anything found, at least for the next 3,000 years?
I really couldn't have an opinion on, because I haven't studied the other nations and their policies regarding the captured prisoners in wartime. I would probably have to ask a couple people. You would know one of them for sure, and give you an answer at a later time. I honestly couldn't answer that.
Perfectly fine. Would you agree that, presuming, of course, and all of my questions do presume that Moses actually wrote this law, so I appreciate you running with that assumption, because obviously,
that's a different debate. Yeah,
you're right. Exactly. So would you agree that the laws and what I meant by Deuteronomy abolishing, I hope I didn't say slavery, but what I meant is kidnapping, actually, any sort of a slave trade, right? As you know, we obviously abolished here in the States in 1807, same year that Britain did, fun fact. Now, so then would you agree that we see the first abolition of kidnapping and slave trade, and that this is also something that appears to be almost 3,000 years, if not over 3,000 years? I say almost just because I don't know if anybody did it before Europeans, but the first Europeans did it around 1807. Anyways, like, would you agree to that statement that this is the first abolition of slave trade we see in a for thousands and thousands of years?
Well, if you're talking about like in the Bible itself, I don't, like I said, I disagree with your proposition that Deuteronomy abolishes slavery. I think it sets the rules for it. Now, if you're talking, you know, later,
well, hang on real quick.
Later in Israel's history, they certainly did abolish slavery, and I think that they, as far as I know, were one of the first nations to do so.
So I want to clarify. So when I say abolish the slave trade, I don't mean slavery itself.
Well, yeah, the slave trade within the nation.
Yeah. So to be legally specific, so in 1807, which is the same year Britain and the United States both abolished what they called the slave trade. What they meant was international trading of slaves, right? You can't kidnap people and sell them into slavery, basically, right? You also can't split apart families and that kind of stuff, right? That's found in Deuteronomy, though, 24 to be specific. Deuteronomy 24:7 is one of them, and it's also in Exodus 21.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we don't consider that to be the liberation of the slaves here in America, right?
No, I'm not saying abolishing slavery. I'm just saying strictly the slave trade as it is legally understood, right? So that's the abolition of the slave trade, meaning international trading, kidnapping, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, sure.
And if you so notice then, and these are some of the things I presume you'll probably be questioning me on in your cross-examination, right? Because they're things that are go-tos for atheists. Well, we have slavery, and we have the marriage of war captives and all this other kind of stuff. And yet we kind of have to concede that there's nothing all over the entire planet that's found anything like this for at least 3,000 years, if not more so. And the first international law is, I think, 1998. But the point being, not saying was it ethical in the time of Moses, but just in the grand scheme of things, do you recognize the progression of morals that is pushed forward by the law of Moses?
No, not really. This is where I say that I was giving too much ground on this matter for a very long time. I've had several scholars on the topic approach me and say and tell me that it really wasn't all that much more progressive than what was around it. You know, Christians really like to argue that it was, but it wasn't. I don't think that there was any abolishing of the slave trade at the period of time that we're talking about right now in any way whatsoever. There was a clear defining of terms on how to have slaves and how to treat them, sure, but there was no abolishing of it. That would come much later. I don't think that it was set apart, set aside. It makes it any more special than the other nations around them. As I mentioned, you know, the Jews were doing some pretty horrible things back then. They were literally decimating the Canaanite peoples, taking these people as slaves. I don't see how that can be considered, you know, some golden spectrum in this moment of history.
Just real quick, if I may, because I know, you know, you'll have the 10 minutes there, and I know you'll bring that up, so that's why I wanted to cut that off.
Maybe I've got a lot of laws I want to bring up and ask you about.
Fair enough. However, so real quick, just so you know, so Deuteronomy 24:7 does say, if a man is found stealing one of his brothers of the people of Israel, if he treats him as her as a slave or sells him, then that thief shall die. And then Exodus 21, I don't actually have Exodus 21 up.
Those are Israelites, though. Those are Israelites. You're not supposed to make them slaves anyway.
That's why I was bringing up Exodus 21. Exodus 21 is actually not, I believe, specifically. I'd have to find the exact verse that it's in there, though, so I don't want to take up my time. So when you say these laws are not actually as progressive as others, so can you give me just as to give one example? Do you know of any other group of people in the world that was, for example, making war rape illegal?
I don't understand how you're saying they're making war rape illegal.
Well, are changing this system, right, to where you're not able to just force yourself upon a woman, right? The only way that you're actually able to go into a woman in any way is that you have to actually marry them, right? And that comes with a great
I mean, you
deal of
call it
privileges.
marriage. You call it marriage. I call it kidnapping, forcing them into your home. I mean, what are these women going to do? Do they get to stay? Do they get to stay in their own homes?
Well, obviously,
Do they have a choice?
obviously they've been defeated, so right that wouldn't be able to work, right? So they're obviously
Doesn't
they're
it?
coming to
Doesn't
Israel
Mosaic?
one way or
Doesn't
another,
it?
but they're not forced into the marriage. There's no indication that they're being forced into the marriage,
So
right?
what's the option if they're not going to be if they don't accept the marriage?
Well, I would assume it'd just be the same as everyone else, right? You're just one of the servants like everybody else is.
You're a slave.
So,
2 minutes.
but, thank you.
I don't consider that moral, CJ. I
Okay,
don't
but
consider.
either
I
way,
don't consider that ethical.
you disregarded the point, though, right? If you notice, neither of those options is being raped, right? Whereas every other army for the next 3,000 years,
Well, for
is
one,
gonna
it
have-
depends on your perception of rape. I say if there's no option, if there's no real consent there, then that is rape. You know, it matters how you define rape. And to say that there wasn't still being rape happening in times of war is just pure insanity. It might
I'm not saying
the
that
law
didn't
might
happen. Obviously,
you
it's
know.
going to happen, but like just because somebody makes murder illegal doesn't mean that murder doesn't happen, right? So that's a non sequitur. My point is that the law of Moses.
I will grant that it could be seen as a mercy considering the Mosaic law calls for the slaughter of all of them. So to me, I will concede that it is a mercy that you're not just slaughtering them wholeheartedly, that you're giving at least the women a chance to live, but there's no real consent there. There's no option to remain in their land, in their homes. It's either be my wife or be a slave. I don't think there's much of an option.
I'm just curious. How would they remain in their home? They just got defeated in a war, right? The village doesn't exist. I mean, that doesn't really
I
make
know,
any
but
sense.
we do. There is a thing called innocent bystanders. There, I don't think the women of
30
those
seconds.
nations, maybe some of the women, maybe they were very progressive. Maybe women were fighting, but I don't think that the women were the enemy combatants here. Right. So,
Right.
I mean,
That's why they
wouldn't
weren't
we
killed.
consider that
But
unethical in the modern day? Do we just get to go and just slaughter and then take the women for our wives, CJ? That's not ethical.
okay, but you're still disregarding the point here, though, right? Like we have a situation whereas in everywhere else in the world, you literally just go up to this woman, you force yourself on, you toss her around with all your friends and all the other kind of stuff. In this situation, you have
Hard
something
cut
where,
off. But I think the audience follows you, so you're okay.
yeah, for sure. We got 10 minutes on it, so obviously it's his turn.
I'm sure the Christians agree with you, and if there's an atheist out there, they agree with me.
So let me see. Restart time. Okay, timer is already and restarted. So then Nakasuchi, as soon as you're ready to start asking CJ questions, when you start, I'm going to hit the play.
You're on mute.
You're on mute. Jinx. No.
Yeah, that figures. I do that all the time. All right, so thank you. That was interesting. And it's again, it goes back to my opening. CJ, you really want to take it back into the time. You want me to concede that there was some moral golden standard with this Mosaic law here, and I just don't see it, and that's why I'm here to argue against it. So I really just want to kind of ask you some questions about some of the laws. I've mentioned, to know there is a God would be one of the very first ones. Like, so instantly for me as an atheist, if I were to exist in this culture, I would have to find it unethical not to have the choice not to know there is a God. I mean, wouldn't you, even as a Christian in the modern day world with your own moral code, would you not find it morally unethical for me not to have a choice to know there is a God?
Well, there's a couple things actually, I can't get to a couple things actually. I need to make it pithy, so let me cut off some of that. What I will say is twofold. Number one, I know that's the literal couple, but anyways, number one, Jesus Christ himself calls me to a position where I am not only loving you as I would love myself, but also somebody who is not forcing myself upon you, right? He says that if they don't hear you, you just wipe your feet. Or he gives the example of Paul the Apostle, who just speaks over and over and over and over and over and over again. So I would say that as Christians, I am certainly called to stand against something that would force you to go against your conscience in that sense, right? However, there's the second thing that I would point out here, right, is that not only are the Israelites specifically called to a covenant with God, which makes them unique, but we also have a situation, like I was saying earlier, where for the first time in human history, the law is greater than any man or institution. And you see throughout the Bible that all men are held accountable to this law, right? And I know you said in your rebuttal that, well, I as an atheist would say it doesn't come from God, but that actually isn't relevant to the point, because you could say it doesn't come from God. That's perfectly fine. The point is that it's greater than man. So the king is held to this standard, and the priest is held to this standard, and the prophet is held to this standard even, right? And that's something that is not only unique in history, but doesn't end up appearing until after the not the scientific, what would you call that? It's not the Renaissance. What's the thing that happened in the 1500s? The Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment, yeah.
Yeah, the Enlightenment and the Reformation sort of happened at the same time, and they created a situation where we started being free from this and having law greater than, and you could argue in places like Britain it started before that, right? Like things with the Magna Carta, but that's still in the 1200s AD. You know what I mean? That's like 2,500 years out.
And just real quick, I just want to make sure, Rage, that you know that as far as controlling time, I've paused the time, by the way. As far as controlling time, you have the right to interrupt at some point and stuff if you need to, so that you can get enough questions in.
Yeah, there are a lot of laws, but I'll let you finish, CJ.
Well, I am done. The point just being that I think that Jesus, who I believe is the one who wrote that law, calls me to a standard not to basically enforce that on someone like you, meaning a non-believer, right? But I also think that the point is actually something that is quite grand and that is unseen for literally thousands of years after.
All right. I appreciate that. Let me find it. Deuteronomy 18:22 tells you not to fear killing a false prophet. Is that ethical? Should you, if somebody is a false prophet, should you go kill them?
Well, actually, so there's a short answer to this and a long answer. The short answer is actually yes, that is ethical. Now, let me explain what I mean, because that's the long answer, and I'm not saying anybody out there could go kill somebody, right? So the understanding from Christianity, right, is that these things are indeed worthy of a death penalty. So I'll give you an example that's a little bit even more extreme than just being a false prophet, right? To be against your father and mother, right? To curse your father and mother is literally a death penalty, right? And the idea from Christianity is, yes, this is a death penalty. However, we are all guilty of violating the law of Moses in such a way that we are guilty of a death penalty, right? That's actually the point of having the Savior. And that's also why we are to have forgiveness for people who are also committing sins. So yes, it is absolutely ethical for the false prophets to die. However, if I were to hold them to that standard, I am he who is without sin and casting a stone. And of course, I'm not without sin, right? That's just me being self-righteous.
Well, the law is telling you, though, it's telling you not to fear killing a false prophet. So are you saying that since it's ethical that you can then just go? I mean, I know you're trying to get away from it there at the very end there, but like the law is literally telling you to go kill false prophets.
Right. And so what I'm saying is, so you see this in a couple different areas. Just so you know, this isn't just my ideas, right? I'll actually quote some specific scripture. So Paul, for example, he says that the law is a taskmaster to lead us unto Christ, right? And the point being that it's teaching us about our own personal sin, right? And Jesus actually expands upon this greatly. Well, it's actually the other way around technically, because Jesus comes first, right? But Jesus has a more expanded version of this when he talks his parable about the man who was forgiven a small debt, or a large debt, excuse me. I always mix that up. The man who was forgiven a large debt, but then went to his brother and held him responsible for a small debt, right? The point being that God has forgiven you, even though according to the law of Moses, you're worthy of death. So therefore, why would you now hold somebody else to that same standard when God has now forgiven you? And that is the gospel message, that not that we are worthy of death, but that the Lord has offered salvation, not just to me who's accepted it, but to you as well, who maybe has not yet.
All right. Law number 86, Leviticus 12:3 says, circumcise every male on the 8th day. Now, circumcision is the issue that really allowed for Christianity to get into the Gentiles. That was that original debate. I mentioned it in my opening statement. Do you consider it ethical? Now, in full disclosure, I myself, I don't know. I think circumcision in America is it's like an American thing. I don't think it's very religious. Like I said, I'm circumcised, and I think it's just something we do to our babies here in America. But I've come to see it like, maybe you do as well. Like in my adulthood, like I wouldn't allow that to happen in my adulthood. I'll just put it that way. So I have issues with the ethical and morality surrounding the act of circumcision itself. Do you and do you see this as, being a Christian? I know you're probably more of a Torah observant than most. Do you still not see this as some kind of issue, and understand historically that maybe it was the original issue that drove Paul to that got Paul so many followers with the Gentiles?
Yes, that's a great question, actually. So the first portion of it as to whether or not it's ethical, I don't think there's anything unethical about circumcision. Now, I personally would not circumcise my children, but that is mainly because I feel like it's unnecessary. The only reason you would do it, in my opinion, is because of the fact that it's the covenant between the Jewish people and God. I don't think there's any other reason. And I think there's a couple laws like that in the Bible, right? Like, so for example, when they say not to, round the corners of your beard or shave the corners of your head, right? And that's why Jews look so funky when they're Orthodox, right? Because they got those little curls down and they have big old beards and stuff like that, right? Well, that's sort of the point, is to be like, hey, I'm a Jew, and everybody's supposed to notice, hey, look at that guy, that's a Jew. And that's
2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, I guess that's for you. Anyways, so I wouldn't personally, just because I'm not a follower of the Jewish religion per se. Now, with that said, I do want to briefly address the Paul issue, because it's an interesting issue. We do have to understand Paul's not actually anti-circumcision. We know this because he circumcises Timothy actually before he ordains him a bishop. The reason he circumcised,
I think it was propaganda. It's to me, it's like a no-brainer. To be cut down there or not to be cut down there, that is the question, right?
Well, and his point, and don't get me wrong, I understand, because that's not actually even, to be fair to you, that's not just an atheist talking point. A lot of scholars of religion believe that had a big, big impact on whether or not this was going to be accepted by Gentiles. But what I would say is, I think that they miss the point of Paul, which is to say that, let the traditions to the Jews be unto the Jews, and the traditions to the Gentiles be unto the Gentiles, so long as it's not violating our conscience or the law of God. And the law of God, of course, there meaning the law that Jesus says on this, the whole law stands. And I think the point just kind of being that, it's not that he's against circumcision. He's just simply saying it's not something that is necessary, salvific, or even makes you a more moral person. It's nothing more than a sign that you're a member of the covenant of Israel.
All right, there's so many I want to get into. There's two right here I'm looking at, but I'm going to settle for this last one. 30 seconds. The rapist must marry the maiden, Deuteronomy 22:29. Is it ethical to make a woman marry her rapist?
Right. So that actually is a misinterpretation on a lot of people's part. Now, there are certain Bible versions. I think there's 2 or 3 out of there's 50 some odd English Bible versions.
I got this list from a Christian university, but I didn't check all of the verses to, double check them.
Oh, no. I'm not saying that there aren't, Christians who would affirm this or anything. Don't get me wrong.
Hard stop.
Shoot.
But you guys will probably open the opening discussion.
Yeah, I'll let you get your answer in.
Yeah, that'll be up to you guys how you do the opening discussion. I should not interfere. Okay, so so we're going to do a 20-minute open discussion with our 2 interlocutors. And then after that, they'll each get a 5-minute closing before we go to questions. I think so far we have 1 question. Yeah, so I have a couple questions I can contribute to, but actually I think I forgot them. Anyway, I'll go ahead and. Oh, what, Knock?
It sounds like me. I do it all the time.
And then okay, I'll start the clock. once you two start talking.
All right, yeah. I mean, CJ, if you want to get your answer in there, because I hit you, I hit you there with a good one right at the end when we only had 30 seconds left. So,
yeah, absolutely. So, now one of the things I wanted to point out is there are a couple of Bible versions that do actually outright translate that verse as if somebody rapes a woman, and that it's a big portion of where the misinterpretation comes from. The overwhelming majority of your English translation won't. They will use the phrase "lay hold," which literally meant in Hebrew. Like I am laying hold to my phone right now, right? It's not something that's violent or anything like that. And one of the reasons that we actually can prove that, and I don't like retreating to the Hebrew, but you can in this instance simply to say the previous verse, not 4 verses earlier, condemns the rapist to the death penalty. And then in this verse, it actually uses, when it's talking about laying hold, a different word, one that is used to describe a man just going into his wife, as the King James Bible would put it. So I don't think this is actually properly understood when we say it's actually somebody selling a woman to their rapist. I think that the law of Deuteronomy just a couple verses earlier condemns the rapist to die. And also is very against fornication, just for the record, which even if somebody didn't consider it to be rape, which obviously I'm not saying that would be the case, but in the worst case scenario, right, somebody doesn't consider it to be rape, well, it's still bare minimum be fornication, which the Bible's very much not down with.
Yeah, I mean, I will, I often talk about inconsistencies within the Bible, and I do believe one of the laws that I didn't put on my list because I didn't find it morally reprehensible, if I'm remembering correctly, was the rapist will be put to death, right? So I'm pretty sure I read that in that list. I could actually pull back up the whole list if I needed to, but I'll actually concede that. But it's still very problematic, and we've actually seen it played out in modern times because people do take this very, very literally, and we have seen a couple states try to pass laws that give rights to the rapist, parental rights, if not go all the way with it like this. But it is problematic, I think, and I think you would agree that the wording of a lot of these things could be a lot different. My thing is, like, I know, we had this big blow up in our last debate. I kind of lost my stuff about slavery, so I was going to try to stay away from that. But I mean, we don't have to, but like a lot of these things, a lot of these old laws, I think that Christians argue, there's so much argument about them within Christianity because deep down you understand that they are very problematic to the moral sense that you have now. I will totally agree that people at the time, they had probably no moral issues with any of these laws. To them, it not only did they come from God, but it was how the times were back then. So I grant that. Like I said, if the debate was about did they consider it moral, that I couldn't disagree, so I wouldn't be here arguing it. It's about whether I consider it moral. So I'm asking, you have to at least see some of the problems with the wording of a lot of these laws.
Well, I can say this much in agreement with you, which is that I do think that the law of Moses is exceptionally harsh. I think that is not only a good thing, but it's making a very specific point, frankly. And that's something that potentially we can get into if you'd like. But I would agree with you on that. Like, it's got a lot of death penalties. It does not take anything lightly. Like there's not a single slap on the wrist law in the entire law of Moses, right? Everything is serious. And there's certainly, a level of, like, I don't even know what the word would be. Maybe even shuddering, right? When reading that, because it's just like, wow, I mean, that would impact me quite a bit, right? Like, I'd be one of these people who's, X, Y, and Z. The thing is I think that's the point. I think that's entirely the point. If the New Testament is to be trusted, then that is entirely the point. Now, I know as an atheist, you would take the position probably that Christianity evolved out of Judaism, not that it's actually literally carrying on the spirit of it. But as somebody who's a Christian, I would say that it actually makes a whole lot of sense to me that Jesus is able to build off this in the way that he is, because think about Matthew 28 as an example, or excuse me, Matthew 5:28. My apologies. And Jesus says to even look upon another woman with lust is to commit adultery with her in her own heart. Well, if to commit adultery is to be worthy of death by the law of Moses, then every single time you've looked at some girl's butt and it wasn't your girl's butt, you are now worthy of death according to Christianity. That's rough. That is harsh, rough chastisement right there. But
off of that, we don't see moral or ethical through our modern lens. I don't think that you would see that moral or ethical.
Well, and that's one of the things that would differentiate where I'm coming from ethically from where you're coming from ethically. I would say that not only is that absolutely ethical, but it builds a greater ethic for us to build on. It's ethical because it's wrong for us to objectify women in that way. It is wrong for us to look at women who are not our own, right? Or look at men who are not our own if we're obviously on the reverse of that. Because that's obvious. You're supposed to be in covenant with this particular person. You're not going to have your wandering eyes, right? Those things are wrong. But at the same time, there's a greater ethic you can build off of the fact that everybody's done that.
It's just been my experience. Like if you build a dynamic, like just looking at my dad, right? My dad's a good Baptist Christian, but I mean, he can. There's this running theme in the house. You can look, but you don't touch. Like the natural thing for a human being is to look at what they're attracted to. You don't stop being attracted to just because you get married. The struggle is, not to act on those baser instincts. My dad and my stepmom, they'll joke about that, and I think healthy marriages are healthy because you understand that human beings are human beings and they're going to have their faults, and you're open about that, and you have an open communication about that. I think you set yourself up for failure if you say, oh my God, I fail every time I look at that ass there. Well, you're attracted to that ass. It's how you act on that makes the man. You know what I'm saying?
There's a couple things I want to point out. One is smaller, so I'll get to it quickly, which is notice that you've actually already adopted my own manner of speaking about this. You call it faults, right? You acknowledge each other's fault. Exactly. That's exactly my point. You recognize, hey, humans are naturally, we're kind of gross. We objectify each other. We're kind of violent. We're kind of greedy, right? And all of us are. It's not just you. It's not just me. It's not just Nicholas. It's not just anybody else in the right? It's all of us. That's the whole point. And when you're looking at that as, first off, it's a negative, so you're trying to change it, right? And it's important to look at things as negatives when they're negatives, because then you improve upon it. But also you're recognizing how universal it is. Now you're that guy with the debt forgiven, who instead of going out to the guy who has a smaller debt, you're saying, you know what, I forgive that debt because my debt's forgiven, right? And I would, go and say, like the woman caught in adultery, go and sin no more, to use the analogy, go and acquire no more debt. You know what I mean? So try to improve, but also when you're not actually improving, we recognize and have grace on people, because that's precisely what God has with us. But that doesn't mean that such and such a thing now all of a sudden becomes unethical, right? And this is where I get to the second part of my point. And I'll ask, if you need to take longer than a yes or no, that's fine. But if you can do a yes or no, that would be awesome. You probably won't, I'll be honest with you. Just because it's a complicated question. So if somebody has intent to kill somebody, but doesn't actually have the means or opportunity to do so, is that evil?
That is a hard one. That's hard just to answer yes or no. Let me think.
I figured it would be, so that's why I kind of took back what I said, to be honest, because I don't think that's a yes or no question. It's a pretty ethically slammed question.
They had the plan and the intention to kill, so killing cold blood. They just didn't have the means or the equipment, I'm guessing, to get there or pull off the act. Yes, I would say that is wrong.
All right.
Which would be, I guess, the best way to describe it in moral terms, as right or wrong.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, by the way. And then now there's a second question. Is it evil or wrong in a moral sense, right? For somebody to kill someone without any intention of having done so?
Gray area. I mean, morally and ethically, no. If they didn't have intent to kill. No, I guess there would be a lot of questions. I mean, it would depend on the manner of death, I guess, because I mean, if they didn't have intent to kill, but their child dies from malnutrition, Well, yeah, I think that they're morally responsible, ethically responsible in every sense of the word. If they're lifting a piano on a crane and the crane breaks and they kill a person, no, I don't think that they have any moral issues. I think that it's a tragic event that they'll deal with the PTSD for. So yeah, again, a very hard question to answer without understanding the manner, I guess, in which the person died.
And again, that's fair. But again, I would point out that we agreed. Now, let me point out the two things that we've agreed on so far, right? The first thing we agreed on was that if somebody has full intention to kill, but lacks only means, opportunity, something along those lines, that would be wrong. And also, if somebody had no intentions to kill, and also assuming no, any other sort of neglect or malpractice or anything like that, right? And did end up killing someone, that's not something that is actually morally wrong. In other words, what do we agree about? Intent actually matters more than action. Intent is what makes actions evil, right? Not actions themselves. Now, obviously, actions themselves do have the actual impact of that evil. Your intent doesn't necessarily carry the impact. And that's something that you could obviously go into. But the intent does have actually greater weight in the end than the action itself, which is why, and by the way, the laws recognize this too. We have murder versus manslaughter laws, right? And even in murder, there's a hierarchy: 3rd degree, 2nd degree, 1st degree. Some states even go beyond that, right? So now take this to what Jesus is saying about hating your brother without unjust cause or looking upon another woman with lust, right? If these things are things which do actually lead one to do things like adultery and assault and murder and things of that nature, then he's actually making a pretty solid point. You're guilty in your heart because that's where you were going to complete the action. That's where you wanted to do it, right? You just manifested into reality by means typically of your opportunity. And that's evil. But you recognize that that's evil in you and therefore have grace on other people. You see what I'm saying?
Right, we have about 8 minutes, just so you guys know.
So even if I grant you that, looking at that ass is how we both put it earlier. If that's evil or if that's something that should be regulated, fine, I'll grant that. But the penalty is a bit harsh or unethical. I mean, to kill a man, to kill a woman, seems a bit harsh and unethical. I mean, that's fairly obvious, I think.
Well, and so with this, I would want to give another example then, right? So God is supposed to be pure, right? We would agree on that. Like not according to, I mean, according to the Bible. The Bible paints it as if God is a pure and righteous being. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's take an example of any pure product. Let's say pure water. Okay. And let's say you somehow managed to get a nanoliter of a nanoliter of a nanoliter and actually dropped that into your water. Well, it's no longer pure water anymore, is it?
No.
Right. Now, if hypothetically speaking, that water were able to purge itself of all impurities, for example, like a bleach would, that would mean the utter, essentially, destruction of that nanoliter of nanoliter of a nanoliter of ink, right? It would be completely purged out. Therefore, the product would maintain its purity. For example, something like bleach, right?
I do have to warn you. I mean, you're getting into some frightening talk here, CJ. I mean, when you start talking about purity and keeping the waters pure, I think atrocity results. If you look at Christian history,
from people who don't understand, though, and let me explain, because what we have here is we're talking about God, right? God is this liquid that I'm in my analogy, right? This pure liquid, and even the smallest little drop of any impurity into this liquid, right, creates an impurity. That's exactly the point, right? It's almost to say, like, to be in a building is to be inside of a building, obviously, right? Now, if God is a purging purity that maintains his purity, then he would obviously deal away with any such impurities. In other words, the very nature of purity is that no impurities are allowed in. If you have a truly righteous God, he couldn't allow any unrighteousness, right? You following me?
Yeah, I'm following. I'm not sure where. I mean, I think I know where you're trying to take this, and I have to say this is a debate on um, morality and whether or not the law is ethical. And I think that you're making a very good argument why it isn't ethical at all. I mean, you're talking about purities. You're talking about I mean, we're not even talking about the act of adultery. We're merely talking about looking at another person now, right? And you're talking. I mean, I don't think that you're making the point you think you're making here.
Well, to be fair, the law of Moses wouldn't actually have you necessarily stoned for that, right? That's Jesus's taking the what would you say, extrapolation off of it, right?
So yeah, I definitely don't have that as one of my laws that I was going to talk about for sure.
Yeah, and the adultery law would be the one we're talking about as it pertains to the law of Moses. But the point just being, right, your objection, if you're actually reading between the lines, it's not even that the law of Moses is unethical, it's that it's too ethical. It's too good for human beings. Purity creates an unattainable standard.
No,
right?
No. I know you really want that. I am saying, and just by the line of argumentation that you were just leading us down, I think that you just argued my position perfectly well. This can be one of the most abominable moral standards that we've ever seen, because it can lead you into that place that you were just talking about, that place of needing to clean the well, if you will, to get those impurities out of that water. Like I said, I mean, granting even that the act is wrong, right? The penalty for it is atrocious and without a doubt unethical. You're talking about a purge. You're talking about, if one neighbor doesn't like another neighbor, then all they got to do is, I saw that dude looking at my wife, right? I mean, this is not an ethical law or standard or anything we would allow in today's modern civilization.
Well, again, I would point out to you that there is a point of this being the taskmaster, right? That is leading us to, in other words, if I were to, once again, going back to that analogy Jesus gives, if I were to hold you accountable to the law of Moses, I'd have to be held accountable to the law of Moses, and then we're all dead, right? And that, I believe that's precisely the point as laid out in the New Testament. However, again, right, if you're actually looking into, and I understand what you're saying. I understand your point that this law would create such an unattainable standard that literally you're executing people for everything, right? I get that. I 100% follow you. But notice the nuance of that statement. You're saying that, okay, if we're going to agree, even if we agree, as you said, that the action and that the intent is wrong, the penalty of purging it is too much, right? Isn't that what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, a death penalty. I mean, you could put a garter belt around the person with a lock they're not going to break, right? You could even putting them in prison, I would find morally unethically wrong, just for the simple act of looking at another woman if you're a man, or just looking at another person that's not your spouse.
2 minutes.
Yeah, plenty of other ways you could go about punishing such an act without such strictness, don't you think? Or death.
Right, but only death maintains the purity, right? Only death maintain, and again, totally granting your point that maintaining that purity is deadly, right? Let's just call it what it is. It's deadly, right?
We did kind of get away from the Mosaic law. I'm sure that this was somewhere in there, but we have 2 minutes left. I do want to ask you one final one, right? To marry a childless brother's widow, right? Now, I know that there was an exemption. Yes, I have my camera. There was an exemption for it. I think it was a legal process you had to file to where you can exempt from this law. And as a brother, you didn't quite have to marry your widow. It's not saying that you had to. It was saying that you were obligated pretty much to marry your brother's widow. And I think that there is without a doubt some moral and ethical issues here. Now, I also know, in this time period was one where it could be almost impossible to find a husband. If you were widowed, if you lost your virginity outside of wedlock, it could be almost impossible to find a husband. So it could be argued, well, in that instance, it would be moral, that this man is going to take this woman. But they had already established a brother/sister relationship. I think that it's only moral and ethical to allow somebody to, marry who they love. What do you think, CJ?
So I would just, because I know I got to be brief, I'll just say that so the point of it was supposed to be to maintain the lineage of the brother. So in other words, when you had a child with the wife, it would be considered the child of the brother who died. And while I live in a culture where such a thing is just absolutely out there, and I do certainly grant that, I get it. Like I do understand that logic, and there is an interest about it that intrigues me. I can't give an answer much more detailed than that, but I see the point of, continuing on the lineage, having being an ancestor of someone by proxy and so on.
Time is over, and the audience follows, I'm sure. So we'll cut it there.
Appreciate you.
And then I guess I'm done needing the timer, right? Because we're not specifically timing the Q&A. Okay.
Yeah, that is correct.
And okay, so that was a very good debate.
Enjoyed it.
I have stuff I wish I could say.
Well, I'm sure.
So I'll probably want to talk to CJ about this one later in particular, because it's I guess it's sort of like one of my main topics. But okay, well, we heard from both sides debating whether or not the law of Moses is ethical. And I think for a mere hour and 20 minutes, that was a very excellent debate. So
I had fun. That was enjoyable. Thank you, CJ, for offering to have this debate with me. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was well worth missing Brady going back to New England, for sure.
For sure. I appreciate that as well. I liked it a lot. It was a great conversation.
Nice. And then, okay, I'll get right into, I think we only have 2 questions total. Let me scan the chat just real quick to make sure I didn't miss another one. Yeah. And one of them is from me. So if anyone has more questions, I'll still take them, of course. But question for CJ. Oh, I didn't get the name, but I'm pretty sure this was from Jill, or known now as Rebuke and Reprove. Were U.S. soldiers wrong or unethical for taking women war brides, in quotes, from Japan, Germany, Korea, and several other nations after going to war with them?
Well, that question is actually a lot more nuanced than I wonder if anybody understands. And my reason for saying that is because that is very much something that varies from person to person. So, for example, there were some people.
I agree.
Right, exactly. Right. There are some, and I even know some of these people who they literally fell in love with a soldier who was over there and then moved back to the States with them. It's just that simple. Right. And then there's also stories of absolutely atrocious things that happened. Like, for example, when the Soviet Union and England, and America too, but America did, to its credit, get there at such a time that it couldn't have been guilty of most of the atrocities. But nonetheless, when they got to Berlin, the amount of sexual assault that was taking place and people being kidnapped and becoming brides at that point, it's horrifying, actually. It's one of the, don't get me wrong, the Nazis kind of had, the conquest of Berlin coming, but at the same time, it's like, oh my goodness, this is one of the most horrifying things I've ever read about in my life. And so it really does depend.
Yeah, just to answer real quickly, because Jill did direct that at me before you actually asked it as a question. My answer is the exact same as CJ's, and it's kind of what I outlined when I was talking about this during the debate. It is a matter of consent. If the woman fell in love with the soldier and willingly came here and married him, I have no issues with that. If there was a law telling the soldiers they could take wives, well, I would definitely have an issue with that, right? So I would agree totally with what CJ said.
Okay, and then I guess we'll do the... Well, I don't think we have to necessarily bounce back to CJ. You guys agree anyway? So, but we don't have enough questions to establish a formal format after the fact, in my opinion. So I'll ask my one question now. Let me see. Oh, okay. So Rebuke and Reprove did clarify that the question was for Rage. So I guess he was tagging CJ. But
he did put CJ. I saw that.
I guess that was just the tag to make sure someone saw it. So he must have not been here when we gave the instructions at the. Okay, and then I'm going to ask my question now. Oh, I got to open the correct. Okay. So this is,
to answer what he just put, marriage without consent is sexual assault, Joe. You do understand that, right? All right, sorry, Nicholas.
Oh, you're fine. This is your guys' show. And then, so it says here, how do you? Oh, this is my question. Yeah, this is for both of you, I guess. Maybe CJ should answer first. So, how do you think the law of Moses fits or does not fit with deeper philosophy of ethics? And by deeper, I mean like deeper than what's been mostly discussed. You guys were a little more on the pragmatic side with your discussion. So I'm asking kind of from the philosophical end for each of you.
Well, I would say there's a twofold question with that. The first, or answer with that, excuse me. The first is, as somebody who adheres to divine command theory, as well as what I would personally term divine Platonism, which is basically, I believe in Platonism, but I believe that rather than being grounded in objects, things are grounded in the mind of God. I would say that the law of Moses, by definition, has to be ethical. In a way that, like, and that's why I said I wasn't going to argue from that perspective today, but I am a presuppositionalist in that it's one of those things where, like, if God laid down, since he's the source of morality, if he laid down morals, they kind of have to be. Now, obviously, there is a question as to who is God, right? So that each individual person needs to answer that for themselves. But if a God did dictate morality to the world, and that's where morality comes from, that he's just the source and there's nothing we can do about it. So that would be the first aspect of the question. The second aspect of the question, if you were just to sort of secularize it and look at it comparatively to other ethical systems, other philosophers on ethics and morals and things like that, a lot of ethicists and philosophers will even admit just how important it is to them, like Immanuel Kant. And actually, you can even go further than that with things like Immanuel Kant admitting that he has a lot of influence from it, even though he tries to refute it effectively. But a lot of these ethical systems are literally based on the law of Moses. So, like, for example, if you were to take Sharia law, if you were to take Catholic canon law, if you were to take the Mandaean faith, anything that comes from the Gnostics, of course, common law ended up being based off Christianity, right? So effectively, most of these law systems in philosophy and law are ethical systems in philosophy and law, I should say, are actually based off of the law of Moses anyways. So I think that the law of Moses is arguably the most influential legal text in world history.
Yeah, philosophically speaking, I think it sparks some really interesting conversations about what is right and what is wrong. I think looking at the law, if you look at the law, and you take away, as kind of CJ was hinting at during the debate, if you take away the harsh penalties of it, then it's not quite as bad. Those harsh penalties is often what makes the laws, in my opinion, reprehensible. But if you take it as, like, on a deeper meaning, and it's trying to, tell people, a progressive message of, hey, do right by those around you, love your neighbor. I think that it could be argued for that way. If you take out the harsh penalties, even then you're still going to run into some, when you have a list of 613, you're going to run into some problems, I think. But I definitely think it sparks a fascinating discussion about what is right, what is wrong, especially when you have two people willing to just, really be interested in what the other has to answer. I'm really surprised more people isn't having this debate. I'd like to see other people's opinions and takes. Usually I'll watch debates to kind of, get some guiding force on maybe how I want to argue, what I want to argue. I couldn't find a single one. Right. So
yeah, I think a lot of Christians in the current social climate are afraid of the topic.
Well, let me say this much on that, because the Old Testament is something that people run away from. If you look up, did Moses exist? One debate will come up, and it's mine and Jim Majors. If you look up, did the slaughter of the Canaanites literally occur? One will come up, and it's mine and Randall Rousers. If you look up, did the law of Moses?
I don't doubt it.
Yeah, it's the thing. Like, these are
I'll
entirely
debate
ignored topics.
I guess there's some topics that someone else needs to get into, so it'll be me. I guess so I'll start looking for some of these.
That's what I'm saying. Old Testament topics are utterly ignored. So
CJ approached me with this topic, and I was utterly, just of course, I want to have that conversation. This is going to be fascinating, right?
Yeah, for certain.
And we got one more question from Smoky Saint. He asks, how does Rage think marriage was handled before the 19th century? And I don't know if that was just a side chat question or not, but I mean, it's a question, so I'll ask it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know. I never really looked at it. I've never really been interested in the practice of marriage, even here in the modern day. I've never practiced it, never planned on practicing it. I don't believe that being sexually attracted to people is wrong. So, I've never restricted myself. I've been in serious relationships that I was faithful to the person I was with. But ultimately, they usually ended because I wasn't interested in marriage. So I've just never been interested in marriage altogether. It's just not something I've been interested. Definitely didn't look at how they did things back before the 19th century. I am interested in ethics and morality, and learning about it, trying to fix my own, trying to make myself better. That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, and I would say, while I certainly understand the point of the question is to hint towards a lot of the different aspects of, like, people were looking at humans more as a resource than as individuals, because they had to, right? Not because they wanted to necessarily, but because that was just, unfortunately, the harsh nature of reality. There was also, obviously a lot to do with, like, for example, royalties and things like that. You're not just going to have your princess married some Joe Schmo down the street, right? Because she's a king, or because she loves him, even though he's an idiot and he's going to be the king, right? That can't work.
I always have to forget. I have to be exactly precise with Smokey saying around, because of course, it's not always right to be sexually attracted to another person. Don't be attracted to a child, you idiot. No, it's sexually attracted to a grown ass person you are attracted to, whatever that would be.
But for the audience, I'll just mention that Rage is responding to something inside chat. CJ sorry. I don't have the power to put it on screen. Clear. Otherwise, I would have.
I have to be clear and say things precisely with him around.
Well, and I'll just say, though, also, there is something to be said, because, we do have an idea that romance is kind of new, and that's not actually true. In fact, if you look in the Bible, there's actually some really good instances of romantic kinds of falling in loves, right? For example, there's the Song of Solomon, Solomon and whoever the bride actually is in that story. There is the story of, I believe it's Jacob who gets Rachel, if I'm not mistaken. He has to work for, Jacob works for Leah and then gets Rachel. That's obviously in the very first book of the Bible, all the way back in Genesis. So, it's not like it's 100%. It's partially true, though. So I don't want to pretend the question comes from nowhere, because it doesn't. But we do have to understand that, like, romance does go all the way back to the beginning of time. It's not like it's a new invention.
Yeah, I know the French thought that they got the romanticism from Rome, and that's why it's called romance.
Yeah, but I mean, even look at, you see, the Iliad, right? The whole thing that's said to start the Trojan War, and whether or not this is historically accurate or not, that's not the point. The point is, in the 600s BC, Homer wrote a story that said that the start of this war was two people falling in love and having a relationship with each other afterwards. So it's like,
that also exemplifies Smokey's point too, though.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. I get his point for certain. It goes, but it's on both ends. You know what I mean? Like, certainly romance existed, and also certainly marriage is different. It's a nuanced question.
And he must not have been here for the whole debate, because we did address that topic. I'm arguing from a modern lens. CJ, I don't think you deny you're trying to argue more from the lens of the time, right? So we have kind of addressed that. Like I'm arguing from my modern lens, my modern ethics, not the way the world was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. The question is it ethical? Not was it ethical then, right?
Very well said there, Rage, because you did do that. I was there. Now, here we are. Rebuke and Reprove has another question now for Rage. Have you been or are you able to prove the war brides in Scripture were forced Israelite soldiers to marry and thus unethical? So that must be were forced by Israelite soldiers to marry and thus unethical. So can you prove that? Or is it just your assumption?
Wasn't there to do a cold case study. I don't have DNA kits. I go based upon what the Bible says and what I can presume from that. Again, if there's no consent, it is to me unethical. And I don't think that there can be any true consent when the choice is slavery or marrying your husband's murderer to attain some form of citizenship in this new society that you're being forced into. So hopefully that answers Joe.
Okay, you're on mute, CJ. I don't know if you want to say a quick something on that, but I think that is the last question, and we may be about to wrap up. Oh, did I even give you guys? Crazy. Did I even give you guys a chance for closings? I forgot closings, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, I guess we can close with closings. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm not
yeah. That's what we'll do. So, I guess we'll let you close first, CJ, and because people tend to go in the same order the whole time, right? Yeah, CJ will close first, then Rage, and these are 5-minute closings, and then CJ will close out the show after that. Hold on, give me 1 second to get my timers up because I closed them earlier when I forgot that there was still another section. I should have checked my notes. I just thought I knew what I was doing. So,
well, and just
okay, I'm ready
briefly, just for the question, I just wanted to say there is rabbinic tradition that dates back to the Second Temple period, which is after the book of Malachi was written, but before the New Testament, or sometimes people would extend it to the time of the New Testament because technically the temple was destroyed in 70, right? But the point is, around that time, there is rabbinic tradition that goes back to that time that says a bride must be willing according to the law of Moses. And obviously they're not saying that it's explicitly saying that. That's why it's a tradition. They're saying that was the understanding. So at least up until the 400s BC, they understood it as implying that consent had to be given. Okay. And then I'm ready to move on to the closings. All right. So CJ, as soon as you start, I will start my timer. Absolutely. Thank you. So I want to obviously say thank you to everybody who has been here and who decided to show up. It's obviously the same thing. I'm Jay from the Department of Redundancy Department. But anyways, appreciate you guys very much. This is a great conversation, and I hope that we can talk a lot more about it. I personally plan on having a lot more conversations about all these different things: Canaanite slaughters, flood of Noah, law of Moses, slavery, all this kind of stuff. This is the stuff I want to get like serious conversations on, and some of those have been done more than others. This one in particular, I think, is almost never done. So definitely appreciate Rage coming on to talk to me about it. Proverbs 27:2 says, "Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth; a stranger, and not thine own lips." So if you guys think that I did a good job today, if you think that this was a good example of a defense of the law of Moses, please say so yourself. It's not something that is to come from me. Proverbs 27 also says, in verse 17, "Iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend." If you think I did a terrible job today, and that the law of Moses was simply eviscerated because of my complete and total incompetence, then definitely let me know. Because obviously constructive criticism is a good thing, and we don't want any blights on the name of the Lord. With that being said, I'll go ahead and give my quick conclusions as to what I actually think about this, and they're obviously going to be a lot less scripted because I don't have the book of Proverbs to literally quote them from. Anyways, bad joke. Stupid. So I think what we found today, bare minimum, is that the law of Moses is very, very much ahead of its time and has a lot, and we're not talking about hundreds of years, we're talking about thousands of years. And that when understand from the Christian context of this leading you to actually have greater grace on people rather than taking it to the conclusion of executing every human in the planet, that it actually can create a very forgiving, very loving person. And indeed, that's the intention that Paul and Jesus seem to lay out for us. I think we also were able to see that for the most part, in fact, I believe Rage even said this, and you can correct me in his closing if not, with the exception of penalties, the law of Moses is actually pretty ethical. It seems like a good way to live. It seems good not to commit adultery. It seems good not to murder. It seems good to treat the foreigner the way that you would treat yourself. It seems good to love your enemies and to give them bread, obviously, when they're hungry. All these other kinds of things which we find in the Old Testament and specifically in the law of Moses. I would posit to you that if the problem with the law is primarily that the maintenance of purity is overtly harsh, well, we agree. That's the whole point of the New Testament. The New Testament provides people a way out of the penalty which all of us are deserving of, namely death. Human beings, frankly, do a lot of detestable things, every single one of us. But the understanding of that allows you to build yourself into a better person, to improve each and every day, and to have grace on your fellow human beings, seeing yourself in them. And that, my friends, is one of the key elements of the gospel. I say one of because the gospel truly is this. If there truly is to be maintenance of that purity, the Lord has offered everybody a way out. Personally, I think the law of Moses should be argued because the law of Moses leads us to the greatest of all truths, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ, that all men shall be saved if they simply believe in him and confess him as Lord from the penalty that comes from, as clearly laid out by this law of Moses, namely death. With that, I would yield my time. Shalom to you all. God bless. And have yourself a fun conclusion statement, Mr. Rage.
All right. Yeah. My daughter took my ink pen when she did her nighttime shot. I'm like, damn it, my ink pen's over there now. So I there was something I was going to respond to, but I'll just let it go. No, interesting conversation. I enjoyed it. My ultimate point is I'm arguing from the modern lens. I fully acknowledged that to these peoples during the time, even with the harsh penalties, that this would have been considered moral and ethical to these people. It would have been considered probably a lot more progressive, in my opinion, than a lot of the cultures around them at the time. I think they were definitely more progressive when it came to slavery than other cultures around them. Now, I know some historians will argue that they were less progressive than some of the other far Near Eastern civilizations at the time, but from what I've studied, I can say that with confidence. The question is if it is ethical, and I do remember the thing I wanted to respond. I didn't say it would be still, if you take away the harsh penalties, it would be like this great standard for moral and ethical behavior. I think that you would still definitely have problems within it. Several of the laws that I pointed out during this debate would be some of those, but it would definitely be better without the harsh penalties for most of these laws. But I think it is a fascinating conversation when you think about morality, when you think about what is right and wrong. I think it would be an interesting debate to have from like maybe a scholars on the topic that knew other civilizations and could really get into the was Israel the most moral of those nations? I think that would be fascinating to learn about that. It might be something I start looking into more myself, because I have had scholars tell me that it wasn't. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, and I try to be honest about what I don't know.
Okay. He's got it covered. But you still have to unmute. Okay.
I do want to thank CJ for asking me to have this conversation. I think he understands that I enjoy having these conversations. I like, especially when it can be a healthy conversation. There's no pointing the finger. I didn't come here to point the finger at CJ and how dare you think this ethical. I truly want to understand, and I want to refine my arguments and understand these laws better. I think that we all need to try to be better human beings. So with that, thanks for listening. Thanks for having me. Nicholas, you did a hell of a job. Thanks for being a great moderator. And yeah.
Well, aside from the word choice, I'll thank you for the compliment. And then, well, this is just my personal thing. I see Kelvy Cuello's comment. He says, I rejected Christianity the first 32 years of my life. For me, it was 33. And he says, on purpose. Oh, let me dismiss the timer. Then he says, I studied all religions. If I'm wrong, there is no truth. And this is outside the debate. I just personally, I just agree with that. So that's that. And then CJ, I guess it's your show to close, right?
Absolutely. So I'll say, end it with this. Ladies and gentlemen, if you liked this debate, please do like and share this video. Get this out to all the different social media platforms which you frequent. Of course, what good is any debate, message, or lecture of any kind without an audience to hear it? Please do leave questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, or anything of like manner in the comment section below. Do feel free to give honest criticisms as well as honest praises on either side. They certainly will not be censored in the live chat, or not in the live chat, excuse me, in the comments. I want to go ahead and, as I do on all of my videos, remind you guys to please get on alternative social media platforms. If you're not somebody who considers yourself conservative or right-wing, that's fine, because you showing up makes the website less conservative and less right-wing. That's part of the reason we want you there, right? If you agree that it is bad for the big tech overlords to be censoring us in the ways that they do, get on Gab, get on Parler, get on Minds, get on something. Come talk to your conservative boys, make it less of an echo chamber, and let's get some freedom on the internet yet again. Lastly, I want to say, if you guys would like to subscribe to this channel, please do so. Obviously, you got to hit that bell to get notified of anytime we go live. Those of you who watch the majority of this video, you did the number one thing that can be done for the algorithm, more than liking, sharing, subscribing, any of that stuff. So I certainly appreciate you there. If you'd like to contribute to the Patreon to help me make this into a career, you can certainly do so, but please only do so if you feel led, if you feel that it does not burden you, and if you feel I deserve it. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, I just want to remind you that we had a couple of guests here today. Brother Nicholas has his own channel, Nicholas Proclaimer of Messiah, where he does conversations on the Bible and sermons for the most part, as well as sometimes talking with some other brothers about different doctrinal issues. And the Raging Atheist, my debate opponent today, also has a channel where he talks about activism from a progressive standpoint as well as an atheist standpoint, of course. Talks theology, has debates, talks a little bit of the debatosphere drama, as of course we all do. And definitely check that out if you're interested there. So God bless you all. Appreciate you guys showing up here today. Keep us in your prayers. That's the number one thing you can do for this channel, because obviously that's the intercession of the saints with our God, right? And with that, I'll say, if the Lord tarries and wills it, we'll see you all here soon.